really fit into that very complicated and subtle customer journey that everyone seems to be taking on their way to all products, including CPGs. To take the lead on this panel, we have Don Huesman, who's the VP of Empower Media Marketing. He oversees and focuses on the e-commerce and the CPG sector. Before that, he was the director of the grocery channel at Geometry. Please welcome Don on our panel.
Hi, everyone. We on? Good afternoon. How is everyone today? Good lunch. We're not outside in the rain, so it's all good, right? Interesting note, as I became aware of the conference and decided I wanted to attend, it swiftly morphed into my marketing director at the agency, going from attendee to panelist to moderator. So I would tell everyone out there, be very careful of how you engage in the conference, because you may get wrangled into, at this point, one of the easier topics of the day, right? What is the CPG media plan now? How do you answer that? I mean, it's the evolution of media planning, especially in the CPG space, is just, it's difficult, right? It is going to be a question that's going to keep a lot of us up at night as we look at our clients or we look at our brands and how to move to market. So we wanted to try to provide a simple framework on how to think about it, because we already heard today from so many categories. We talked about health with aspirin and Dr. Scholl's. We talked about baby, nutrition, food with Chobani, electronics, and if Doug is still here from Geometry, if anybody wants to steal his Bose headsets and see a freak out he talked about, that might be an interesting end of the day. And also Red Bull. So we've heard beverage as well. So how do you think about that as a whole in terms of media planning? We decided to try to simplify it to a degree, or bring you a framework at which we can have some discussion and commentary against. And that really begins with thinking about products as two different constructs, one being a chore product and one being a cherish product, right? Because we're not going to be able to get into the different categories and brands, but within those two constructs, let's have that conversation about what does media planning look like for them and how can it evolve as we move forward. So how do brands know if they are a chore or a cherished brand? And if so, how do they plan against that? And then also, do the consumers believe that of themselves? Do the consumers believe that that brand is a chore or a cherished brand? So I pose that to James first.
Yeah. So just to explain quickly the chore and cherish, I'm sure many of you have heard of it before, but the idea being that brands, especially CPG brands, can fall into one of two buckets. There's the cherish bucket, which is products that people are really emotionally invested in. They're kind of researching heavily. They're making sure that they're making the right decisions. And it's essentially an extension of their personality. Then on the other side of it, you've got the chore. And the chore is more of like the product that you have to buy because you need to buy it. You go out and it just needs to be efficient. And that's why Amazon is doing so well with those products. Somebody referenced earlier on that batteries sold on Amazon make up massive, massive percentage of all batteries sold. Because I don't want to go out. I don't want to emotionally invest in my batteries. I just need it to happen quickly, right? So thinking about how we balance those two and how the media plans for those are very different is kind of the structure that we're using. So out there, I'm going to represent chore because I'm boring. And then Kalyn's going to represent cherish. So thinking about how brands can figure out whether they are one or the other, I think for the most part, it's pretty easy. You should know whether you're a chore or a cherish if you think about it on a continuum of cherish on one end and chore all the way on the other. If you're on the polar ends, you know which you are. Where the trouble becomes is in the middle. If you're a product or a brand that can kind of flip-flop between the two, how do you know which one of those you are? And I think it comes through working closely with, the data that you have internally as clients and brand side, but also the agencies that you work with, looking at the consumers and figuring out how long are those purchase cycles, how much time goes into research, is there any social interaction? These are all things that you can look at to figure out, is it a chore or a cherished brand? But beyond that, thinking about how do you know when you flip-flop between those two? Because there are going to be moments, depending on which consumers you're talking to and where they're at in their lives, you can be both. So a good example is toothpaste, where probably half the room would say, okay, for me, toothpaste is a cherished brand because I want really white teeth, I want really healthy gums, I research it a lot. The other half of the room might say, well, it's toothpaste. They all do pretty much the same thing, so I buy whichever's in front of me at the time. So it can already be either. So then if you go down to an individual consumer basis and you're looking at one person, that person could be thinking about it as a chore, but then suddenly if they get proposed to or they propose to someone, there's a wedding coming up, it might then switch to be cherish. You want to make sure that in those wedding pictures you have great teeth and you look lovely. So now you're reinvesting in the decision that you're thinking about there. So understanding the way that people are interacting with your product, interacting with the category, but then also what else is going on in their lives that's going to influence those decisions is going to help you understand whether you want to be a chore or a cherished brand and deliver the right content accordingly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I told you I was boring.
No, it's not boring. And where you are in the life cycle as well, I think helps to know that. So I don't have much to add to that. It pretty much describes it. Yeah.
Well done. So we know that the first step for any CPG brand in creating a successful marketing strategy and therefore a media plan against that marketing strategy is a good brief, right? And I think all media planning should start with a good brief. You know, we love a perfect brief, but we're all realistic in this world. And I, for one, have never seen a perfect brief, so we're good with just getting a brief, much less a good brief. So what does a good brief look like that would then lead to a solid media plan in development?
So for us, it's definitely going to start with your KPI, how many you have. Can we narrow those down to hopefully one or two? But also, what first-party data is there? Second party, what can we marry it up with? I mean, the information about specifically more on the cherished side is I want to know the emotion behind what's going through the mind of your consumer. What is their attitude? What really is moving them? And so that's going to be the part of, do we have that data? Do we need to go find that data? Emotion is going to be the key, I think, for that part.
Yeah, and I think everybody says this, but it's worth saying again. I think collaboration on the brief is a big thing. Everybody has a distinct role feeding into the brief, and we were talking about before this that there's essentially two briefs. There's the brief out and then the brief back, where the brand side will give us the agencies think about it and then give it back. And I think the way that we're thinking about it is essentially taking the business imperatives that are driven by all the data that you have brand side is one part of it, but then translating that into a consumer and audience strategy through the understanding of audiences that we have on the agency side. Those two things have to come together so that you're able to take the business inputs and turn those into actionable kind of outputs. That all needs to be fed into the brief rather than being a post-brief process.
So with that in mind, when we ask our clients or our partners for a brief and we try to narrow it down to KPIs and hopefully down to a singular business objective, what does that look like in a new process, in the new world of clients and or brands or even category managers thinking about it as putting their partners in a box versus giving them an open-ended business problem to solve? How do we think about that in terms of media planning?
You start. Go ahead.
Did we stump ourselves with our own question?
I think we may have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't think about the agencies as being in a box, but if they each play a distinct role within the briefing process, that can be important. Each of the agencies sits on their own treasure trove of data that can feed into a holistic approach. I think the more each of those can be brought in to one bigger picture, the better.
Yeah, if you don't, you've got to share the data. And I was just having a conversation about, I'm going to work a lot at the top of the funnel, and but the data that I need at the bottom of the funnel is just going to make me smarter about what I feed into the top again. And so, in order to really marry that information together, you've got to be able to share it, and you've got to feel comfortable sharing what it tells you. And there's different sides to every story, right? So how we might look at this data and how you might look at that data, but we've all got to come to an agreement on the story so that we can utilize it more accurately.
Okay. So as we begin down that path of we've got a decent brief, and again, we all strive for a good brief, we'll go with a decent brief, and we begin to think about the media plan development, how do we, as also a construct, think about the effective and efficiency within the new media plan or the modern media plan, because I think, again, depending on the product or the category, it's going to be different. So how do we think about that as a whole between effective and efficient?
I'll start. So from the cherished side, the role, effectiveness is going to be more important. I mean, you've got to be efficient. That's always a no-brainer. But you've got to be more effective with your creative message. You've got to be more effective with the amount of weight that you're giving out there. I think you've got to be more creative in the way that you are using all of the media. I mean, the world today, it's blended. So talking about HelloFresh and now going retail and starting to apply a lot of the retail mentality to marketing instead of just the CPG way, these channels are going to cross over. So I'm going to use the digital information and the digital ways that I've been advertising online, but now I'm going to retarget direct mail within 2 days. I'm going to retarget my outdoor boards with digital overlay. So to me, that's going to be a lot different, and that's how we've been structuring things. It's a real blend of it all.
Yeah, I think through the lens of a chore brand specifically, you're going to jump straight to how efficient you can be. Just by the nature of chore brands, people tend to have shorter purchase journeys. It's in response to an immediate need, so people are going to think much more in a condensed fashion with chore brands. So effective or efficiency is going to be probably where you're going to want to start thinking. But that's not to say that effectiveness is something that you're going to ignore as well. The way that I think about it is that it's not really a funnel going from effective to efficient. It's more of a top-down and a bottom-up approach, in the sense that from an effective point of view, that's where the channels like TV come in that have been proven to be the most effective, even though they're not necessarily the most efficient. And that's where you're kind of filling the bucket and you're building the brand. And then on the other side of that, you've got the efficiency. You've got the digital plays where you're making sure you're capturing any hand raisers in market. And essentially, that's extracting the value from the brand. And it'll be different for Chore and Cherish, and it'll be different based on what brands you're talking about. But both things need to happen, where you need to be filling the bucket at the top and you need to be extracting the value at the bottom. And if you're over-investing in filling the bucket and not getting enough value out of that, then you're wasting opportunity. If you're over-investing in efficiencies and getting conversions out the bottom of this funnel, I guess, without filling it at the top, then you're wasting money. So there needs to be an appropriate balance. That's how I would think about it.
Yeah.
So speaking of balance, as we're talking about CPG, it's very difficult to talk about CPG without talking about our retailer partners, right? And how they influence not only some of our business strategies, but also our media planning. So in the modern world of media planning, how and where do we allow our retail partners to have perhaps a say in our media plans? Because in the past, sales folks, as well as category managers, or even retailer vice presidents, are having a bigger say in how we, as their partner, spend our money. And it brings up an effective and efficient conversation. But how do we think about our retailer partners when we do our media plans?
I mean, I think you've got to do the data share. I can only be as effective with my clients' data as long as I can marry it up with the retailer's data. So they've got to be very open to sharing that information. With that, they've got to be open to the story that we're going to come back and tell about utilizing our first party, their data, and the recommendation we're going to provide, which might not be what they're thinking, because they aren't necessarily thinking about all the things that are happening on the client side. But they need to be open to testing. And I think one way for us to kind of get through that door, that barrier of what they want and what they see that works, there's a lot we can put on a pretty flow chart that you can go in and sell in that gives a perception of something. But what really is going to happen on the back end is what's going to matter. So if you can prove it out with a test, then I think that you're able to work around more about what they want in some of their older ways, and the way that we really feel we need to get that message across. Yeah,
I would agree with that. I think as agencies, our responsibility is to build trust with the retailers and show them we have a real deep understanding through the data that we have of the customers that we're going after. But the test and learn, I think, is a big thing as well. If we, one, show that we really understand how to reach consumers and get them through the purchase funnel, I guess, in the quickest way possible, then we can start to break down into tests and learns and follow perhaps the 70-20-10 rule, where 10% of the budget perhaps goes to just testing new things and having the retailers on board with that.
Well, speaking of testing new things, as we look at social as a key component of our media plans, right? It's becoming probably even a higher percentage than it has been year over year. And our retailer partners, at least some of the ones that I've dealt with in my previous, world in grocery, they didn't necessarily get it. So speaking of test and learn, so does social and or word of mouth have a deeper share of the media plan, and should it, and why?
Yeah, this is an interesting one for the chore products, because people tend to not want to talk about them, and I don't blame them. Like, who wants to talk about their toilet roll or their toothpaste? It's not like a topic of conversation I have on a daily basis anyway. But there is a role for it in the plan. An example, a couple of years ago, I was working on Nivea Men, and essentially, I think it was Kylie Jenner or Kendall Jenner, one of the Jenners, tweeted that she used Nivea Men as a makeup primer. And what we saw as a result of that, I would love to say that we engineered it, but we didn't. There was a huge spike in sales and just general word of mouth amongst teenage girls with Nivea Men. And it was a really bizarre situation because the brand benefited hugely from it. But it showed that with the right audiences, with the right people talking to them around the right topics, that you can gain a huge spike in word of mouth. And I think that it can be engineered. And I think what we learned looking at that from the Nivea Men point of view is not trying to drive word of mouth with mass audiences, but focusing in on specific audiences, finding something very, very relevant to them, and then talking to them about it, rather than starting at the top and trying to filter that down. And I think that as we're approaching that, we always have to start with the end point in mind and work our way backwards. Too often we can go into, especially with social, briefs that essentially ask us for talkability, which more or less is asking for virality, which I always avoid like it's the plague. But if you start with the end point in mind and work your way backwards, it gives you a much better chance of doing so. We were working on a campaign recently, or a brief I should say recently, where the creative idea included the end point being the brand shared as a meme, which is great, it's a good ambition to have, and our point was if we're going to go into it that way, then we have to start by designing the actual meme that we want people to share rather than hoping that they do, and then work our way backwards from that point. And essentially the media plan was informed all the way through by the end point that we were trying to get to. So I think that it can have a role, it just needs to be thought from the end point backwards.
And for the Cherish specifically, I think it has a big role. Obviously, you really have that brand ambassador, right? That true advocate who very quickly and easily is going to socially spread the word, and that's gonna you need to take hold of those and really embrace those social influencers, which I know we're going to talk about after this. So I think that's a great place to go. But for specifically, if you are a Cherish brand or in that life cycle, in that place, I think that and the things that you can do now with social, like I was talking about Facebook, it really is a lot of opportunity to take that and really grow that excitement about a brand. But the way that we can now take Facebook and get it into conversion, but getting it into actual retail store and just buy it that way. So now that it's all crossing paths, streams, I think it just becomes an even stronger tool for you.
So with everything is media, and media is everywhere, there was a point earlier today that perhaps we should be thinking of media planning with digital first. So truly a channel vehicle first before anything else. What do you think about that?
I would come back to my building the brand, extracting its value thing, where on a brand by brand basis, you need to take into account the realities and the things you're trying to achieve before saying I'm going to be, broadcast first or digital first. It's more about what does the consumer need, what type of product am I, and where can we insert ourselves within their overall consumer journey, and then work backwards from there, rather than thinking from a channel or a platform first. Think consumer first.
Yeah, to me that's just very tactical. Our world of traditional and digital have blended together. It's just all media. It's all connected or not connected, and so we don't think of things in the world of, well, should I do digital first, or I've never even thought about should I do TV first. It truly is that end result and what's going to resonate with your consumer. And so right now, if you come to me, our plans, regardless of category, our plans are extremely blended. You will find any and all kind of media, because you do need lots of touch points, especially in CPG. You've got to have the touch points there. And I really think that the more that we're open to getting to that balance, and I know everyone wants that holy grail, what is that perfect balance? The way to get there is the testing and the shifting and optimizing your schedules, which makes my job harder in running and owning an advertising agency, because I no longer have my annual budgets to forecast against. I know the plans are all fluid. CPG is one of the last ones to go, and those plans, they need to be fluid. So we have to completely evolve who we are and restructure so that we are as fluid as the plans that need to be activated throughout the year.
As we continue to think about media planning, the modernization, if you will, of media planning, it was also mentioned earlier that creative and messaging strategy may be the next tipping point within planning, and the marrying of message and creative and true plan. How do we think about that? And does that need to become a much further upstream decision within the brief, or even further upstream about trying to marry both creative and media planning together?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, I like this idea. So I came from a creative agency originally, ended up in a media agency. So I like it when the questions lead towards bringing creative and media together. And I think that it is the way to go. So we were talking about earlier on, or I was giving the example of toothpaste being a chore or a cherish, depending on the moment that you're talking to people in. The more we can bring the knowledge of when and how we're going to talk to individuals upstream into the brief, the more we can inform how we're actually going to deliver messages to those people. And ultimately that means that then the media agency and the creative agency have to be together in the same room with the brands as we put the briefs together to figure out not what we're going to say to people, but what we're going to say to them when, and what it's going to mean to their overall journey.
Yeah, our success has always been on the fact that we are, our meetings with the creative team has been always fluid, whether I was in a full service agency and we were down the hall, or whether we're all virtual now and partnering up across the country. We really have to have everyone in the same room, and we really do feed off each other. That's old school. It goes back to really old school. And it just, nowadays it's moving so fast, you really do have to have that very open dialogue of conversation and be open to really having someone challenge you creatively in your media choices to go figure out how to solve that.
So where messaging meets audience, truly bring that forward, correct?
Yeah.
So we wanted to kind of break this up as well. You have a panel of experts here. Any questions regarding the new plan or how to plan differently moving forward?
This is kind of a selfish question because I'm also a small agency business owner. So with the need for fluidity and constantly changing budgets, and there's no longer this annual CPG planning cycle that happens, how do you do that? How does an agency or a media partner thrive in that sort of ever-changing dynamic?
I wish I had the answer.
I was hoping you did.
Yeah, I'm working on it. We have really evolved. We've been around for 19 years, and so pre-digital and whatnot. But so there is an evolution for sure on your team, and the way to do that is to make sure that everyone on your team is completely 100% fluid in all media. So having that, going that path of I've got my one digital person, or I'm going to build that digital team. They don't know traditional and vice versa, and now we don't. It's all blended now. So it's really important to make them fluid, because then you don't have to always have that other. I've got when I'm sitting in front of a client, we're having dinner, and I'm hearing the pain point, and of what it is I'm trying to solve. I can't come to you with the, oh, here's my traditional answer. I need to bring my digital guy so that they can then answer it digitally. There is one answer. It's a mixture of it all. And so making sure you'll gain efficiencies by making sure that everyone is very fluid on it, and then you don't have 2 people in a meeting. So that's one way. The other is more of a, to me, it's more of a flat structure, less of the, oh, I've got my assistant, and then the planner, and then the supervisor, and it keeps going on up. I feel like that kind of day is over. And so again, there's a lot more, the kids coming out of college are a lot more educated. They're teaching things so much more in the school. They're coming out more experienced. So actually giving the younger generation, the newer generation, who've got just phenomenal and brilliant ideas, giving them a chance to let that flourish. I think that sometimes that gets a little stagnant.
I'm not a small business owner, but I'll answer anyway. So it's a good question because as you move away from the annual planning process, there's briefs that come in on quicker timelines with quicker turnarounds, and there's more expectations on the same staffing like sizes. So how do you deal with that? And I'm not the biggest fan of process. I don't think anybody really is, because it feels like it's rigid and stale and boring, blah, 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 blah. But it can be really good for when there is chaos going on and briefs come in on a tight turnaround, to put kind of priority on a good planning process from start to end, and making sure that also the clients are a part of that conversation, so everybody's aware of, these are the steps that we're going through, these are the steps that we're taking, this is the inputs, this is why we're doing it. And I think when you get to the output, everyone's more happy when you've done that. It's just a case of making sure that you're kind of strict with yourself and your teams as you go through it. Because you don't want to overlook steps, and because there's a tight turnaround, end up with a campaign that's less than what it could have been, just because we've kind of tried to rush through the answer.
Over here.
Okay. Hi, my name is Oded. I'm working in digital media planning for over a decade, but on the other hand, I have a lot of respect to traditional media planning, the art of the past, where you decide if the campaign time will be burst or recency, where you looked for the halo effect, and other old and known terms, daytime and prime time and so on. And when I try to build online media planning, I try to build it according to these models, or at least to be inspired by them. When I'm asking myself, is it a campaign of recency or a burst? Do I want to reach the target in daytime or in prime time? And then what is daytime online and what is prime time online? So my question to you as experts, do you find yourself also using the traditional methods, because it wasn't mentioned here? Do you think they're relevant? And also, one thing which is always strange for me in online media, people hardly look for the context of the content. Yes, we're looking for brand safety. CNN is brand safety. But what do I buy in CNN? What kind of content? Is it happy content, sad content, etc.? Okay.
So my answer to that is going to be the consumer is going to drive it, right? So we are using traditional methods of trying to target okay, I've identified these consumers, there is a heavy usage of daytime viewership, so on and so on. However, instead of looking at it that way, now we're looking at the consumer first and how they're consuming media and when, and we'll go there first and back into it. So I'm going to be less likely to come back with a daytime recommendation because the data showed me that. I'm going to be more about this particular consumer with these habits and these emotions, and their engagement with the creative tells me that this is where I need to be. So it's a little bit led differently, I believe.
Yeah. And I would add, as a business leader side, I would ask my planners to provide me multiple models, right? Multiple rationale points to show the variety and options that are there so that we can provide our clients range of options versus one tried and true model that might not be as modern as, or going with the most modern model that some might feel, well, it's not rooted in true history and true data points. So I would say range is good, especially in planning as well.
You may have just answered, but I'll ask anyway in case there's more to add. I'm Joy, and I was wondering, you were speaking about challenging and educating your retail partners to move beyond what they know has always worked. I'm interested in how you are cultivating that within your own agency cultures, especially with some of the younger teams, empowering them to push beyond what has been proven, what worked before, and to champion new media initiatives and channels.
You know what, my team, they surprise me. They embrace it like there's no tomorrow. We're very open to, I'd say we're very meeting friendly. We look at every media partner, every vendor, whatever platform. We look at talking to everyone because it just educates us every time. So and whether it's one person does it, they come back, and then we're really utilizing those ideas across all of our industries. So whether it's CPG, retail, restaurant, name it. But for us, it's they're very engaged and excited about the latest and greatest. We'll meet with a vendor recently about Addressified, and again, that's the crossover between I've served a display ad, and now I've got a location target base, and I've got a direct mail piece that showed up at that address 2 days later. So that is something that's exciting and new in a great way, and so we really just grab onto those. And again, there's so many new things that happen every day. So it's really just been the excitement of your team and being challenged by our clients to come up with new things like that. And so we love working in the news space. We love knowing what's the latest and greatest with Amazon or with Facebook, and our clients allowing us to take a test budget and try it. Even though some are new vendors and they haven't been completely vetted out, there's some great technology there that we find, and I think that we get excited.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only thing behind the excitement there needs to be rigor. Is it working? Okay. Behind the excitement there needs to be rigor. So we don't have direct relationships with the retailers themselves. It goes through our clients, who then talking through ideas and where we're at. So the more thorough we can be in making sure that there's tangible outcomes and proven results from the ideas that we're taking to them, that arms our clients to then go to the retailers and put that argument forward. So I think it lies on us to do that. Yeah.
Hi, Patty Reed, Voss Media. James, you talked about building the brand and extracting the value. Just curious, when you start to lay everything out, how do you start to allocate between how much goes towards building the brand versus extracting the value? Because there's so much data now, and there's a lot of push now to be extracting the value and being more efficient. But we know that awareness and top of mind, awareness is also so key, especially in this category and for CPG. So just wondering where you start with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it comes back to a good brief as well. I don't think that every brief throughout the year needs to have the same balance of building the brand and value. But throughout the year, through different briefs, you can make sure that you are focusing on one or the other. And then just making sure that you tie it back to how you build the brand through media. Like specifically, what do you need to do? For example, how many people do you need to reach in X environment, X number of times during the campaign in order to build the brand? And then you can associate a budget with it and put the rest to extracting the value. Or if you go in the other way around and you've got a campaign that's going to be mostly about making sure that we're pulling value from the brand, how much demand are we seeing in market? How much do we put into search, et cetera, and performance media? And then the remaining can go into building brand. Does that help answer?
Don, James, Kalyn, thank you very much. That was expertly done, by the way. Thanks to all three of you. And Don is absolutely right. Those of you who've known me programming these events for over a decade.